The hammer rang against hot iron, sending sparks dancing through the dim workshop like fireflies at dusk. Katherine Doyle wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her weathered hand, her steel-gray eyes focused on the glowing metal before her. At 66, her arms still held the strength needed for this work, though they tired more quickly than they once had. The forge in Ironvale had become her sanctuary 25 years ago, when she arrived in this small mountain town with nothing but a broken heart and a determination to disappear. The workshop sat on Main Street, wedged between the bakery and the hardware store, filling the air with the distinctive smell of hot metal and coal smoke. "Morning, Kate," called out Michael Chen, the baker, as he passed by the open door. "Got those garden hooks ready for my wife?" Katherine set down her hammer and smiled, the expression softening the lines around her eyes. "Just finishing the last one now, Michael. They'll be ready by noon." "You're a treasure, Kate. Don't know what this town would do without you." She watched him walk away, his words settling warm in her chest. This was her life now. Simple, quiet, safe. The people of Ironvale knew her as the skilled blacksmith who could repair anything made of metal, who crafted beautiful iron gates and weather vanes, who always had time to help a neighbor. They did not know Katherine Doyle, the nuclear engineer. They did not know about the research facility in Pennsylvania. They did not know about the accident that changed everything. Katherine returned to her work, shaping the final garden hook with practiced precision. Her hands moved with the confidence of decades of experience, though the experience the townspeople saw was only part of the story. Before she learned to shape iron, she had shaped atoms, working with forces far more dangerous than any forge fire. The workshop was her domain. Tools hung in perfect order on the walls. The anvil, worn smooth by countless hammer strikes, stood at the center like an altar. In the corner, her small office held sketches of projects, orders from customers, and carefully organized supplies. Everything had its place. Everything was controlled. Control. That word had meant something different once. She plunged the finished hook into the water bucket, steam hissing and rising. As the metal cooled, Katherine allowed herself a moment to look around the workshop she had built. This place represented her redemption, her second chance at being useful without being dangerous. The bell above the workshop door chimed. Sarah Martinez, the elementary school principal, entered with her teenage son, David. "Good morning, Kate. David's science project needs some special metal work." "I told him you were the only person in town who could help." Katherine smiled at the boy, who looked both nervous and excited. "What kind of project are we talking about?" David pulled out a sketch showing a small wind turbine. "I want to build this to show how renewable energy works, but I need the metal frame to be really precise." As Katherine examined the drawing, her engineer's mind automatically calculated stress points, optimal materials, and structural requirements. She caught herself, remembering to think like a blacksmith, not like someone who once designed containment vessels for nuclear reactors. "This is excellent work, David. The design is sound. I can help you with the metal work." She glanced at Sarah. "He has real talent for this kind of thinking." "He wants to study engineering in college," Sarah said proudly. Katherine felt a small twinge in her chest. "Engineering is a noble profession. Just remember that with knowledge comes responsibility." David nodded enthusiastically, not understanding the weight behind her words. After they left, Katherine stood alone in her workshop, David's sketch still in her hands. The boy reminded her of herself at that age, full of wonder about how things worked, eager to solve problems, believing that science could make the world better. She had believed that once. The afternoon passed in the comfortable rhythm of work. Katherine repaired a broken fence post for the Johnsons, crafted a decorative iron rose for the community garden, and started shaping the frame for David's wind turbine. Her hands worked while her mind wandered, something she usually kept under strict control. Ironvale had been her home for 25 years. She arrived in the spring of 2000, a broken woman of 41, driving a truck filled with basic tools and a heart filled with guilt. The town was small enough to be overlooked, large enough to have everything she needed. The old blacksmith, Robert Harrison, had been looking for an apprentice. "Ever worked with metal before?" he had asked. "A little," she had lied. "I'm a quick learner." Robert taught her everything about traditional blacksmithing. She learned eagerly, grateful for work that tired her body so completely that sleep came without nightmares. When Robert retired 5 years later, she bought the workshop from him. He died peacefully 2 years after that, never knowing that his apprentice held a doctorate in nuclear engineering. The town embraced her. Kate, the blacksmith. Kate, who fixed things. Kate, who donated iron benches to the park. Kate, who always had coffee ready for visitors. Kate, who listened to problems and offered quiet wisdom. Not Dr. Katherine Doyle, whose research team had been working on advanced reactor safety systems. Not the woman who signed off on a protocol that proved fatally flawed. Not the engineer who watched in horror as the containment breach injured 12 people, including her 3 closest colleagues. The official investigation cleared her of criminal negligence. The Technical Review Board found that the design flaw existed in components she had not personally engineered. But Katherine knew the truth. She had seen the warning signs. She had dismissed her own concerns, trusting others, rushing to meet deadlines, believing that modern safety systems made disaster impossible. She had been wrong. People suffered because of that wrongness. After the accident, she could not return to the work. Every equation reminded her of the explosion. Every technical diagram showed her the faces of the injured. The nightmares came regularly, vivid and terrible. She resigned, divested her savings, and disappeared. Ironvale gave her peace. The forge gave her purpose. For 25 years, she had lived a quiet life, using her hands instead of her mind, creating things simple and solid and safe. The sun began setting as Katherine finished David's turbine frame. She held it up, examining the joints and angles with a critical eye. Perfect. The boy would have a good foundation for his project. She locked up the workshop and walked the 3 blocks to her small house on Maple Street. The evening air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. Neighbors waved from their porches. Mrs. Peterson called out a thank you for the repaired mailbox post. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. Inside her tidy home, Katherine prepared a simple dinner and ate alone, as she always did. The television played the local news. The routine comforted her. But that night, as she lay in bed, the old nightmare returned. She was back in the control room, watching the readings spike, knowing what was coming, unable to stop it. The alarm sounded, piercing and terrible. Then the explosion, the screams, the chaos. Katherine woke gasping, her heart racing. She sat up in the darkness, pressing her hands against her face, breathing slowly until calm returned. "It was 25 years ago," she whispered to herself. "It's over. You're safe. They're safe. It's over." But deep in her heart, she knew it would never truly be over. Some mistakes followed you forever, no matter how far you ran or how well you hid. She rose and went to the window, looking out at the peaceful street, at the town that had become her refuge. Ironvale was good. Ironvale was simple. Here, the most dangerous thing she handled was hot iron, and she controlled that danger completely. Katherine returned to bed, but sleep came slowly, and when it did, Her dreams were troubled by shadows that looked like atomic particles, dancing and dangerous in the dark. Spring arrived in Ironvale with its usual gentle insistence. Snow melted from the mountain peaks, feeding the creek that ran through the center of town. Flowers bloomed in window boxes along Main Street. The community came alive after the quiet winter months, and Catherine's workshop grew busy with orders for garden decorations, repaired tools, and custom ironwork. On a Tuesday morning in late April, something unusual happened. Thomas Brennan, who owned the hardware store next door, appeared at Catherine's workshop, looking pale and unwell. She set down the decorative hinge she was crafting and walked over to him with concern. "Tom, you look terrible. Are you feeling all right?" He leaned against the door frame, wiping his forehead. "I don't know, Kate. Been feeling sick for about a week now. Headaches, nausea, tired all the time. My wife thinks it's just a spring cold, but it won't go away." "Have you seen Dr. Patterson?" "Got an appointment this afternoon. Probably nothing, but I've never felt quite like this before." He managed a weak smile. "Just wanted to let you know I might close the store early if I'm not feeling better." Catherine frowned. "You take care of yourself. Let me know what the doctor says." Over the next few days, she heard similar complaints. Betty Morrison, who ran the flower shop, mentioned feeling unusually fatigued. James Wright, a clerk at the grocery store, had persistent headaches. Even young Rebecca Sanders, who worked at the library, complained of nausea that her doctor attributed to stress. Catherine noted these incidents but thought little of them. Spring allergies, seasonal bugs, the usual minor ailments that affected any small town. She focused on her work, finding satisfaction in the simple act of creation. The Ironvale Community Center had commissioned her to create a large decorative piece for their front entrance, a sculpture of the town's historic mining tools crossed with mountain laurel branches. It was her most ambitious artistic project in years, and she approached it with careful planning and precise execution. As she worked, people stopped by to watch and chat. This was the rhythm of small-town life that Catherine had come to love. Everyone knew everyone. Problems were shared. Victories were celebrated together. "That's going to be beautiful, Kate," said Mayor Rachel Wilson, stopping by one afternoon. "The council is so pleased with your design." "Thank you, Mayor. I'm enjoying the challenge." Rachel hesitated, then added, "Have you noticed anything odd lately? We're getting more reports of people feeling unwell. The clinic is busier than usual for this time of year." Catherine looked up from her work. "I've heard a few complaints. Is it serious?" "Dr. Patterson doesn't think so. Probably just coincidence, or maybe a mild virus going around. But it's unusual enough that we're keeping track." She smiled reassuringly. "Nothing to worry about. Just wanted to know if you'd noticed anything." "I feel fine myself, but I'll let you know if I hear of anything concerning." After Rachel left, Catherine returned to her sculpture, but the mayor's words lingered in her mind. A pattern of illness, unusual for the season. Her old instincts, dormant for so long, stirred slightly. She pushed the thoughts away. She was a blacksmith now, not a scientist. This was a medical matter, not her concern. The following week brought warmer weather and more troubling news. The illness spreading through town was not resolving. More people fell sick. The symptoms varied slightly, but included headaches, fatigue, nausea, and general weakness. No one was dangerously ill, but the persistent nature of the sickness worried the community. Catherine heard the concerns expressed in her workshop, which had become an informal gathering place for townspeople. "My daughter has been tired for 2 weeks," said Linda Kowalski, picking up the repaired garden gate Catherine had fixed for her. "The doctor ran tests but found nothing specific. Says to rest and drink fluids." "My grandson is the same way," added George Patterson, the doctor's father. My son says they're seeing this in about 20 people now. All mild cases, but it's strange. Catherine listened carefully, her engineer's mind beginning to work despite her efforts to suppress it. 20 cases. Similar symptoms. No clear medical cause. A pattern. Is there anything connecting these cases? She asked carefully. Do they all work in the same place or live in the same area? George thought about it. Hadn't really considered that. They're spread all over town, different ages, different jobs. Though now that you mention it, several work at the old Ironvale manufacturing plant. But that's true for half the town, so might not mean anything. Ironvale Manufacturing. Catherine knew the place well. The factory sat at the edge of town, a relic from Ironvale's industrial past. It had once produced automotive parts, but now operated on a smaller scale, doing specialty metalwork and recycling operations. Many townspeople worked there or had family members who did. Probably just coincidence, Catherine said aloud, but her mind was already working, analyzing, considering possibilities she did not want to consider. That evening, she broke her own rules and opened her laptop, searching for information about the Ironvale manufacturing plant. She learned that the facility had changed ownership 3 years ago. The new owners had expanded the recycling operations, processing various types of industrial scrap metal. Scrap metal. Her hands stilled on the keyboard. Industrial scrap could come from many sources. Most were harmless, but some sources, particularly older industrial equipment, medical devices, or military surplus, could contain problematic materials. Materials that, if not properly identified and handled, could pose health risks. Catherine closed the laptop firmly. She was speculating, letting her old professional paranoia create problems where none existed. The town had a mysterious illness. The medical professionals were handling it. She was a blacksmith, not a nuclear engineer. This was not her concern. But sleep did not come easily that night. The next day, Sarah Martinez brought David to the workshop to pick up his completed wind turbine frame. The boy was thrilled with the work, thanking Catherine enthusiastically as he examined each joint and angle. Sarah, however, looked tired. "Are you feeling all right?" Catherine asked. "Just a headache that won't quit," Sarah admitted, "and I'm exhausted all the time. I should probably see the doctor, but I keep thinking it'll pass." Catherine felt a chill. "You should definitely see Dr. Patterson. There seems to be something going around." After they left, Catherine stood in her workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had been her life for 25 years. The forge glowed warm and safe. The metal waited to be shaped. Everything was as it should be. Except it wasn't. She walked to her small office and pulled out a notebook. Against her better judgment, against every instinct telling her to mind her own business and stay hidden in her safe life, she began making a list. People who were sick. Where they lived. Where they worked. When symptoms started. The pattern that emerged made her heart sink. All of the sick people lived in the eastern part of town, downwind from the Ironvale manufacturing plant. Most, but not all, worked at the facility or had family members who did. The symptoms had started appearing about 6 weeks ago, around the same time the plant had begun a new contract processing what they called industrial salvage materials. Catherine stared at her notes. She could be wrong. This could all be coincidence. A virus, environmental allergies, stress, a dozen harmless explanations, or it could be something far worse. She thought about her old life, about the knowledge she carried, about the responsibility she had tried to leave behind. She thought about the accident, about the people who had been hurt because she did not act on her concerns quickly enough. Then she thought about Sarah's headache, David's enthusiastic face, the 20 townspeople who were sick. the community that had given her shelter and peace for 25 years. Katherine closed the notebook and returned to her forge. She picked up her hammer and heated a piece of iron, working it with fierce concentration, trying to lose herself in the simple physical labor. But the questions would not leave her mind. What if the illness was not natural? What if something from the plant was making people sick? What if her suspicions were correct? And if they were, what could she possibly do about it without revealing everything she had spent 25 years hiding? Katherine did not sleep well for the next 3 nights. She lay awake, arguing with herself, trying to convince her worried mind that she was overreacting. The illness in town was probably nothing. Medical professionals were handling it. She had no business interfering. But the engineer in her, dormant for so long, kept analyzing the pattern, the geographical distribution, the timing, the symptom profile, and the more she thought about it, the more concerned she became. On Saturday morning, she made a decision. She would visit the manufacturing plant, not as a former nuclear engineer, but as a blacksmith interested in their metalwork operations. It was reasonable. She could source materials there. Many local craftspeople did. The Ironvale manufacturing plant occupied a large lot on the eastern edge of town, surrounded by a chain-link fence. The main building, a sprawling warehouse structure, showed its age through rusted corners and patched roofing. Smokestacks rose from the processing area, though they were not currently active. Katherine parked her truck and walked to the small office at the front gate. A young woman at the desk looked up with a friendly smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm Kate Doyle, the blacksmith from town. I was wondering if I could speak with someone about possibly sourcing scrap metal for my projects." "Oh, sure. Everyone knows your work, Ms. Doyle. Let me get Frank Morrison. He's the operations manager." Frank Morrison appeared a few minutes later, a heavy-set man in his 50s wearing work clothes and a welcoming expression. "Kate, good to see you. Betty's mentioned wanting to commission an iron trellis from you." "I'd be happy to create one for her. How is Betty feeling? I heard she's been under the weather." Frank's smile faded slightly. "Yeah, she's been tired and achy for a couple weeks now. Doctor can't find anything specific. Says it's probably viral." He shook his head. "But enough about that. You're interested in our scrap metal?" "I am. I sometimes need raw materials for larger projects, and I thought you might have suitable pieces." "Absolutely. Let me give you a tour of the yard and you can see what we have." As they walked through the facility, Katherine observed everything with careful attention. The main processing area handled various types of metal recycling. Workers sorted materials, prepared them for melting or resale. Everything seemed normal and properly managed. Then they reached the newer section, a separate building added to the property within the last year. "This is our specialty salvage division," Frank explained. "We got a contract to process industrial equipment being decommissioned from various facilities, old medical devices, laboratory equipment, that kind of thing. We break them down, sort the valuable metals, dispose of the rest properly." Katherine's pulse quickened. Industrial and medical equipment. Exactly the kind of sources that could contain radioactive materials if the sourcing was not carefully controlled. "That sounds like specialized work," she said carefully. "What kind of safety protocols do you follow?" Frank shrugged. "We have the standard safety equipment, protective gear, ventilation systems, disposal procedures for hazardous materials. The company that hired us for the contract provided guidelines. Everything's been inspected and approved." "Do you test the materials for contamination before processing?" "We do visual inspections and basic checks. If something looks questionable, we set it aside for the specialists to evaluate." He looked at her curiously. "You seem pretty knowledgeable about this stuff for a blacksmith." Katherine smiled casually. I read a lot. Safety is important in any metalworking operation. They continued the tour, but Catherine's mind was racing. Visual inspections and basic checks were not sufficient for detecting radioactive contamination. Many radioactive materials looked completely normal. Without proper monitoring equipment and protocols, workers could be handling dangerous substances without knowing it. She examined the work area carefully. Ventilation was adequate, but not exceptional. Protective equipment was minimal. She saw no radiation monitoring badges, no detection equipment, no specialized containment procedures. If radioactive materials were being processed here, even in small amounts, they could be creating airborne contamination, surface contamination, and environmental release. The effects would be exactly what she was seeing in town. Mild radiation exposure symptoms in people who lived or worked near the facility. "Everything all right, Kate?" Frank asked. "You look concerned." She forced herself to relax. "Just thinking about safety. Old habit. When you work with hot metal and flames all day, you get careful about potential hazards." "That's wise. We take safety seriously here too." After the tour, Katherine selected a few pieces of scrap metal to maintain her cover story and returned to her workshop. Once there, she locked the door and sat in her office, trembling slightly. She could be wrong. She might be seeing problems that did not exist, letting her old fears and knowledge create monsters out of shadows. But every instinct she had developed over her career told her that something was very wrong. The question was what to do about it. If she went to the authorities with her suspicions, they would ask how a blacksmith knew about radiation contamination and safety protocols. Her past would be revealed. The peaceful life she had built would be destroyed. People would ask why she had hidden her background. They would learn about the accident, about the people who were hurt. Her refuge would be lost. But if she stayed silent and her suspicions were correct, the contamination would continue. More people would get sick. The symptoms were mild now, but continued exposure could lead to serious health problems. Children could be affected. David, with his enthusiasm for science, could be harmed. Katherine thought about the accident 25 years ago. She had ignored her concerns then, trusted others, failed to act on her knowledge. The result had been disaster. She had promised herself never again. She had told herself that her silence was penance, that removing herself from positions of responsibility was the right choice. But what if silence now was just another form of failure? The next morning, Katherine made another decision. Before taking any action that would expose her, she needed to be certain. She needed evidence. In her house, hidden in the back of her closet, was a small locked box she had not opened in 25 years. Inside were a few items from her old life: her doctorate diploma, professional certifications, and one other thing: a personal radiation dosimeter, a device she had kept from her final days at the research facility. The dosimeter was old, but these devices were built to last. If there was radiation present, it would detect it. That evening, after dark, Katherine drove to the area near the manufacturing plant. She parked her truck on a side street and walked along the fence line, holding the dosimeter discreetly, checking readings at various points. Background radiation was normal for the area, slightly elevated near the facility, but not alarmingly so. She walked further, checking near the drainage culvert where runoff from the plant entered the creek. The dosimeter reading jumped. Not dangerously high, but significantly elevated above background levels. Something in the runoff was radioactive. Katherine's hands shook as she recorded the readings. This was real. Her fears were not paranoia. The plant was processing radioactive materials without proper controls, and contamination was spreading into the environment. She returned to her truck and sat in the darkness, her mind working through the implications. The contamination was relatively low level, which explained why symptoms were mild. But chronic exposure, especially through water and air, could cause cumulative damage. It needed to be stopped. But how could she possibly convince anyone without revealing her expertise? A blacksmith with a radiation dosimeter would raise immediate questions. Even if she reported anonymously, any investigation would require her to explain her knowledge. Katherine drove home slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had run from responsibility 25 years ago. She had chosen peace over purpose, safety over service. And now her choice was clear. Maintain her refuge and let people suffer, or act on her knowledge and lose everything she had built. She thought about Robert, the old blacksmith who had given her a second chance without asking questions about her past. She thought about the townspeople who had welcomed her, trusted her, become her friends. She thought about David's wind turbine project and Sarah's tired smile. By the time she reached her house, Katherine knew what she had to do. The decision brought both relief and terror. She would have to reveal herself. She would have to face her past. She would have to be Dr. Katherine Doyle again, with all the responsibility and pain that identity carried. But first, she needed more information. If she was going to expose herself, she needed to be certain of her facts and ready to provide solutions. Half measures had caused the disaster 25 years ago. This time, she would be thorough. Katherine entered her house and went to her computer. For the first time in 25 years, she began researching nuclear safety protocols, radiation containment procedures, and environmental remediation techniques. The knowledge came back to her quickly, like reading a language she had once spoken fluently. She worked through the night, compiling information, making plans, preparing herself for what would come next. The quiet blacksmith of Ironvale was about to disappear, replaced by someone she had tried to leave behind forever. But if that was the price of protecting her adopted home, then it was a price she would pay. The next morning, Katherine stood in her workshop, exhausted from a sleepless night, but filled with grim determination. She had made her decision. Now she needed to execute it carefully. Her research had confirmed her suspicions. The symptoms reported in town matched low-level radiation exposure: fatigue, nausea, headaches, weakened immune response. The pattern of illness, concentrated in the eastern section of town and among plant workers, was exactly what she would expect from environmental contamination. But she needed more evidence before approaching authorities. Her dosimeter readings were a start, but she needed samples. Water from the creek, soil from areas near the plant. Ideally, samples of the materials being processed at the facility. Katherine spent the morning fulfilling her normal workshop duties, but her mind was elsewhere, planning her next steps. She would need to gather samples without drawing attention. She would need to test them properly. And then she would need to figure out how to present the information in a way that would be believed and acted upon. Around noon, David Martinez arrived at the workshop, his wind turbine project in hand. The metal frame Katherine had created formed the skeleton of an impressive working model. "Ms. Doyle, look, it works perfectly." The boy's enthusiasm was infectious as he demonstrated how the blades caught the breeze, turning smoothly on the frame. Katherine smiled despite her worries. "That's excellent work, David. You should be proud. I couldn't have done it without your help. The metalwork had to be exactly right for the balance." He hesitated, then added, "Ms. Doyle, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you learn to work with metal so precisely? I mean, I know you're a blacksmith, but the way you calculated the stress points and angles, it seemed like engineering knowledge, not just craftsmanship." Katherine's heart skipped. The boy was perceptive. I've been doing this for a long time, David. You develop an intuition for how materials behave, what forces they can handle. It becomes second nature. But were you an engineer before? My mom said you've only been in Ironvale for about 25 years. What did you do before that? The direct question hung in the air. Katherine could deflect, could maintain her cover. Or she could begin the process of revealing the truth, starting with this bright young man who reminded her so much of herself. I worked with different materials, she said carefully. More technical work. But I found that I preferred working with my hands, creating tangible things. Engineering can sometimes feel abstract. David nodded, accepting the partial truth. I get that, but I love the abstract part too. Understanding the principles behind how things work, the math and physics of it all. His eyes shone with the passion of discovery. Do you think I could really become an engineer? Like a good one? Katherine looked at this enthusiastic young person, so full of potential, possibly being exposed to radiation that could affect his future health. The weight of her responsibility pressed down on her. David, to be a good engineer, you need more than just technical skills. You need to think about consequences, about safety, about the people affected by your work. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You need to speak up when you see problems, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something. Can you promise me you'll remember that? I promise, Ms. Doyle. He looked at her with curiosity. That sounds like you're talking from experience. I am, but that's a story for another time. She managed to smile. Right now, you need to focus on your presentation. That's a fine project, and you should be proud of it. After David left, Katherine stood alone in her workshop, feeling the walls closing in. She could not delay any longer. The conversation with David had crystallized her resolve. These were real people with real futures at stake. Her comfort, her peace, her hidden past, none of it mattered compared to their well-being. That evening, Katherine returned to the area near the manufacturing plant with collection containers. She gathered water samples from the creek upstream and downstream of the facility. She collected soil from several locations. Working carefully and methodically, she documented each sample with precise notes about location and conditions. The following day, she faced her next challenge: testing the samples. She could not use local facilities without revealing her purpose. She needed to send them to a professional laboratory, which required explaining why a blacksmith was concerned about radiation contamination. Katherine spent hours drafting and redrafting a letter to an environmental testing laboratory she had researched. Finally, she settled on a version that was honest, but not fully revealing. I am a concerned citizen in Ironvale. We have experienced unusual illness in our community that coincides with operations at an industrial facility. I have reason to believe environmental contamination may be involved. Please test the enclosed samples for radioactive materials and chemical toxins. She included payment from her savings and used a return address for a post office box she rented under her name. It was not a perfect solution, but it would have to do. With the samples sent, Katherine returned to her normal routine, though nothing felt normal anymore. Every day she worked in her forge, greeting customers, creating her ironwork, maintaining the facade of the simple blacksmith. Every night she monitored the news, checked her dosimeter readings, and fought the anxiety that came with waiting. 10 days passed. The illness in town continued to spread slowly. The count reached 25 people, then 30. Dr. Patterson remained puzzled. The mayor convened a community meeting to discuss the mysterious illness. Katherine attended the meeting, sitting in the back of the community center as concerned citizens filled the room. Mayor Wilson tried to maintain calm, assuring everyone that medical professionals were investigating. Could it be something in the water? Someone asked. Water testing has shown no bacterial or chemical contamination, Dr. Patterson replied. We've run standard tests and found nothing alarming. What about the air? Something from the plant? Frank Morrison stood to respond. We operate well within all environmental regulations. We have regular inspections. There's no evidence our operations are causing any problems. Katherine sat silently, knowing that standard water tests would not detect radioactive contamination, knowing that regular inspections might not include radiation monitoring, knowing that Frank and his workers were likely victims themselves, unaware of what they were handling. She wanted to stand up and tell them everything. But without test results, without evidence, she would simply be a blacksmith with wild theories. They would dismiss her, or worse, question how she knew about such things. So she remained silent, hating herself for it, but holding to her plan. Wait for the test results. Present complete evidence. Offer solutions. Do this right. After the meeting, Sarah Martinez approached her. Kate, you're quiet tonight. Usually you have good insights about community problems. I'm just worried like everyone else. Sarah looked pale and tired. David's been feeling sick too these past few days. Same symptoms as everyone else. I'm trying not to panic, but a mother worries. Katherine felt something crack inside her chest. David. Bright, enthusiastic David who wanted to be an engineer, who trusted her, who might be suffering because she had not acted quickly enough. Sarah, has Dr. Patterson run comprehensive tests? Not just the standard illness panels? He says David's blood work is normal except for slightly low white blood cell count. Nothing that explains the symptoms. She rubbed her temples. I'm probably overreacting. Everyone says it's just a virus that will pass. Katherine made a decision. Sarah, I want you to do something for me. Keep David away from the eastern part of town as much as possible. Don't let him play near the creek. And drink bottled water for a while, not tap water. Sarah looked at her with surprise. Why? Do you know something? I have concerns that I'm investigating. I might be completely wrong, but those precautions won't hurt anything, and they might help. Will you do it? Of course. But Kate, if you know something, you should tell the mayor. Tell Dr. Patterson. I will, as soon as I have facts instead of theories. Just promise me you'll keep David safe in the meantime. Sarah promised, though her expression showed confusion and worry. Katherine hated adding to her stress. But at least David would have some protection while she waited for the test results. The next morning, Katherine received a notification that her laboratory results were ready. She drove to the post office with her heart pounding, retrieved the envelope, and sat in her truck to read the report. The words on the page confirmed her worst fears. Water samples from downstream of the plant showed presence of cesium-137 and strontium-90, both radioactive isotopes commonly found in industrial and medical equipment. Concentrations were low, but above safe levels for continuous exposure. Soil samples showed similar contamination in a pattern consistent with airborne deposition and water runoff. Katherine's hands shook as she read the technical details. The contamination was exactly what she had suspected. The manufacturing plant was processing materials containing radioactive components without proper identification or safety protocols. Workers were being exposed. Airborne particles were settling in the surrounding area. Runoff was contaminating the creek that flowed through town. The exposure levels explained the mild symptoms. This was not acute radiation poisoning, but chronic low-level exposure. Not immediately life-threatening, but dangerous over time, especially to children and anyone with compromised immune systems. She had her evidence. Now she had to decide what to do with it. Katherine drove slowly back through town, seeing it with new eyes. The creek where children played. The eastern neighborhoods where families lived. the plant where her friends and neighbors worked, unaware of the danger they faced every day. She could still walk away. Send the report anonymously to authorities and let them handle it. Maintain her cover. Protect her peace. But she knew the authorities would need expert guidance to understand the report, to implement proper remediation, to protect the community effectively. An anonymous report might be dismissed or mishandled. People could continue to suffer because the response was inadequate. She had run away from responsibility once before. She had chosen her own peace over her duty to act. And people had been hurt because of it. Katherine would not make that mistake again. She drove to her workshop, parked her truck, and sat for a long moment, gathering her courage. Then she pulled out her phone and called Mayor Wilson's office. "This is Kate Doyle. I need to schedule an emergency meeting with the mayor, Dr. Patterson, and whoever handles environmental safety in town. I have information about the illness. It's urgent." The secretary, surprised by Katherine's serious tone, agreed to arrange a meeting for that afternoon. Katherine ended the call and sat in her workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had been her refuge for 25 years. The iron sculpture for the community center stood half-finished in the corner. Orders waited to be filled. Her peaceful, simple life was about to end. But David was sick. Sarah was tired. 30 people in her adopted town were suffering, and she had the knowledge and evidence to help them. Sometimes the only way forward was through the fire, even when you knew you would be burned. Katherine stood, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to become Dr. Katherine Doyle once again. The meeting was set for 3 o'clock in the mayor's conference room at the town hall. Katherine spent the intervening hours organizing her evidence and preparing herself mentally for what was to come. She had not been Dr. Katherine Doyle in 25 years. Stepping back into that identity felt like putting on clothes that no longer fit. But the evidence was clear, and the need was urgent. Her comfort was irrelevant. At 2:50, Katherine walked into the town hall carrying a folder with the laboratory reports, her dosimeter readings, and technical documentation she had prepared. The familiar building, where she had attended community meetings and planning sessions as a simple blacksmith, now felt different. She was returning not as Kate who fixed things, but as someone who knew dangerous secrets. Mayor Wilson met her at the conference room door, her expression concerned. "Kate, your message sounded urgent. What's this about?" "Everything will become clear in the meeting, Rachel. Thank you for arranging this on short notice." Inside the conference room, Dr. Patterson waited along with Linda Kowalski, who served as the town's environmental compliance officer, and Police Chief Robert Martinez, Sarah's husband. "Kate, good to see you," Dr. Patterson said, though he looked puzzled. "The mayor said you have information about the illness?" Katherine took a seat at the table and set down her folder. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. Years of presenting technical findings to review boards had trained her well, and that training returned now. "Thank you all for meeting with me. What I'm about to share will be difficult to hear, and you'll have questions about how I know this information. I ask that you let me present the facts first, and then I'll answer all your questions." She opened the folder and distributed copies of the laboratory report. "The illness affecting our community is not viral or bacterial. It's caused by radiation exposure. Low-level, chronic exposure to radioactive materials being processed at the Ironvale manufacturing plant." The room erupted in surprised questions. Katherine raised her hand. "Please, let me explain." She walked them through the evidence systematically. The pattern of illness, the geographical distribution, the timing corresponding with the new salvage processing contract. Her dosimeter readings near the plant, the water and soil samples showing presence of radioactive isotopes. The laboratory report confirms cesium-137 and strontium-90 in the creek water and surrounding soil. These isotopes are commonly found in industrial and medical equipment. The plant has been processing salvaged materials without proper radiation detection protocols. Workers have been handling contaminated items. Airborne particles and water runoff have spread the contamination to surrounding areas. Dr. Patterson stared at the report, his face pale. This can't be right. We ran standard tests. Water quality, air quality, everything was normal. Standard tests don't detect radiation, Katherine explained. You need specialized equipment and procedures. The contamination is real, and it explains every symptom you've been seeing: fatigue, nausea, headaches, weakened immune response, classic signs of low-level radiation exposure. Linda Kowalski looked up from the report with disbelief. Kate, how do you know how to read these results? This is highly technical information. And how did you even know to test for radiation? The question Katherine had been dreading. She met Linda's eyes steadily. Because I'm a nuclear engineer. Or I was, before I came to Ironvale. The silence in the room was absolute. Mayor Wilson found her voice first. You're a what? A nuclear engineer. I have a doctorate in nuclear engineering from MIT. I spent 15 years working in the field before I retired and came here. Katherine kept her voice level, factual. I noticed the pattern of illness and recognized the symptoms. I tested my suspicions. The evidence is conclusive. Chief Martinez leaned forward. Why would a nuclear engineer be working as a blacksmith? Why hide your background? That's a personal matter and not relevant to the current crisis. What matters is that I have the expertise to understand this situation and help resolve it. I think it's very relevant, the chief said firmly. You've been living in this town for 25 years under false pretenses. We deserve to know why. Katherine took a breath. This was the moment she had feared, but there was no avoiding it now. I left the field after an accident at the facility where I worked. People were injured. The investigation cleared me of negligence, but I felt responsible. I couldn't continue in the work. I needed a fresh start, a simpler life. Ironvale gave me that. What kind of accident? Dr. Patterson asked quietly. A containment breach. 12 people were exposed to radiation. They recovered, but the trauma affected me deeply. I walked away from everything and tried to build a different life. Mayor Wilson studied her with a mixture of shock and concern. Kate, I don't know what to say. This is a lot to process, but right now, we need to focus on the immediate problem. She turned to Linda. Is this report legitimate? Can we trust these findings? Linda looked at the documentation carefully. The laboratory is reputable. The testing procedures are standard for this kind of analysis. The findings appear legitimate, but we should verify with our own tests. Absolutely, Katherine agreed. You should confirm everything, but you need to act quickly. The longer the contamination continues, the greater the health risk. What do we need to do? The mayor asked. Katherine had prepared for this question. She pulled out additional documents. First, immediate actions. The manufacturing plant needs to stop all salvage processing operations until proper radiation detection equipment is in place. Workers who have been handling materials should be medically evaluated. The creek needs to be tested comprehensively and possibly closed to public access. Bottled water should be distributed to residents in affected areas. That's going to cause panic, Chief Martinez said. Panic or justified concern? People are already sick. They deserve to know why and what's being done about it. Katherine's voice was firm. Hiding problems makes them worse. I learned that lesson the hard way. She's right, Dr. Patterson said. If this is real, we have an obligation to inform people and take protective measures. Katherine continued. Second, medium-term actions. You need environmental specialists to assess the full extent of contamination, professional remediation of affected areas, medical monitoring for everyone who's been exposed, safety protocols established at the plant. And long-term? Mayor Wilson asked. Full cleanup of the site, proper disposal of contaminated materials, regular monitoring to ensure the problem doesn't recur, and possibly legal action against the company that provided the contaminated salvage materials without proper documentation. The mayor rubbed her temples, overwhelmed. This is going to be expensive. The town doesn't have the budget for this kind of response. There are federal programs for environmental contamination. The EPA can provide resources and expertise. I can help you navigate those systems. Katherine paused. I know I've just revealed that I've been lying to this community for 25 years. You have every reason not to trust me, but I'm offering my expertise freely to help fix this problem. No payment, no conditions, just let me help. Dr. Patterson looked at her thoughtfully. Why now, Kate? You could have stayed hidden, sent this report anonymously. Why expose yourself? Because anonymous reports can be ignored or mishandled. Because this requires expert guidance to resolve properly. And because... She paused, emotion breaking through her controlled facade. Because I stayed silent once before when I should have spoken up. People were hurt because I didn't act on my concerns quickly enough. I won't make that mistake again. The room fell quiet. Mayor Wilson exchanged glances with the others, then nodded slowly. All right, here's what we're going to do. Dr. Patterson, contact the state health department immediately. Linda, arrange for independent testing to verify these findings. Chief, prepare for a controlled information release to the public. We'll have a town meeting tomorrow evening. She turned to Katherine. And Kate, or Dr. Doyle, or whoever you are, you're going to work with our response team. We need your expertise. Thank you, Mayor. Don't thank me yet. We still have a lot of questions about your past and why you hid it. But those can wait until we've dealt with the immediate crisis. Rachel's expression was stern, but not unkind. You say you're trying to make amends for past mistakes. Here's your chance. The meeting continued for another hour, planning immediate responses and assigning responsibilities. Katherine provided technical guidance, answered questions about radiation safety, and helped draft communications for the public. When the meeting finally ended, Dr. Patterson approached her privately. Kate, I've been treating sick people for 3 weeks, not knowing what was really wrong. If you had spoken up sooner, maybe we could have prevented more exposure. The criticism stung because it was deserved. You're right. I should have come forward as soon as I suspected. I was afraid. That's not an excuse, just the truth. Fear is understandable, but you're a doctor of engineering, with knowledge that could save lives. Hiding that knowledge is a form of negligence. He paused, his expression softening slightly. But you're here now. You brought us evidence and solutions. That counts for something. I hope so. As Katherine left the town hall, the weight of the day pressed down on her. She had done what needed to be done, but at great cost. Her secret was exposed. Her peaceful life was shattered. Tomorrow, the entire town would learn that Kate the blacksmith had been living a lie. She drove home slowly, noticing people on the streets going about their normal lives, unaware that everything was about to change. Tomorrow, they would know about the contamination. They would know about her deception. They would look at her differently, perhaps with anger, perhaps with fear. But David would be safe. Sarah would get answers. The town would be protected. Katherine parked in her driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the small house that had been her sanctuary. Inside, the quiet rooms waited, filled with the simple life she had built. Tomorrow, that life would end, replaced by something unknown. She thought about Robert, the old blacksmith who had given her a chance without asking about her past. She wished he were here to tell her she had done the right thing. Finally, Katherine went inside. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her computer, preparing detailed recommendations for the town's response, compiling resources about radiation cleanup, drafting explanations in language that non-experts could understand. If she was going to be Dr. Katherine Doyle again, she would do the job completely. No half measures, no holding back. She would use every bit of her knowledge and experience to protect this community that had sheltered her for 25 years. The peaceful life of Kate the blacksmith was over, but perhaps Dr. Katherine Doyle could find a different kind of peace, one earned through service rather than hiding. As dawn broke over Ironvale, Katherine was still working, preparing to face whatever came next. News spread quickly through Ironvale. By noon the next day, everyone knew that the mysterious illness had been identified as radiation exposure, that the source was the manufacturing plant, and that Kate the blacksmith was somehow involved in the discovery. Rumors flew through the small town like wildfire, each version more dramatic than the last. Katherine spent the day at the town hall, working with the emergency response team. State environmental officials arrived to begin testing. The manufacturing plant was shut down pending investigation. Workers were scheduled for medical screenings. The creek was cordoned off as a precaution. Through it all, Katherine provided technical guidance, explained procedures, answered questions. She felt herself slipping back into the professional role she had abandoned so long ago. The knowledge came easily, but it brought back memories she had tried to forget. People who passed her in the hallways of the town hall looked at her with confusion and curiosity. Kate, who fixed their garden tools. Kate, who made beautiful ironwork. Kate, who was apparently a scientist with secrets. Some nodded politely. Others whispered and hurried past. No one quite knew how to react. The town meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock at the high school gymnasium, the only space large enough to hold the expected crowd. Katherine arrived early, helping set up charts and diagrams to explain the situation to concerned citizens. Mayor Wilson found her arranging technical displays. "Are you ready for this? It's going to be intense." "I'm ready. I owe these people an explanation and solutions. I'll provide both." There's going to be anger. Fear. People don't like finding out they've been lied to. I understand. I accept the consequences of my choices. By 6:45, the gymnasium was packed. Katherine saw familiar faces throughout the crowd. Michael from the bakery, Betty and Frank Morrison, the Kowalski family, Sarah Martinez sitting with David and Chief Martinez, George Patterson with his son, Dr. Patterson. Neighbors, customers, friends, all of them looking betrayed, worried, or both. The meeting began with Mayor Wilson providing an overview of the situation. She explained the contamination, the source, the immediate actions being taken. Her words were calm and measured, designed to inform without causing panic. Then she introduced Katherine. Many of you know Kate Doyle as our local blacksmith. What you don't know is that Dr. Katherine Doyle is a nuclear engineer with extensive experience in radiation safety. She identified the contamination and provided the evidence that allowed us to respond. I've asked her to explain the technical aspects of our situation and the plan for moving forward. Katherine stepped to the podium, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. She took a breath and began. Thank you, Mayor. I know you all have questions, and I'll answer them. But first, let me explain what we're dealing with. She walked through the situation methodically, using the visual aids to illustrate her points. She explained radiation, how it spreads, why the symptoms occurred. She was clear about the risks without exaggerating or minimizing them. The exposure levels are significant enough to cause symptoms, but not high enough to cause immediate, severe health effects. With proper medical monitoring and the cessation of exposure, most people should recover fully. Children and people with compromised immune systems need special attention. What about long-term effects? Someone called out. Chronic low-level exposure can increase cancer risk over time. That's why we needed to stop the exposure immediately and why ongoing medical monitoring is important. Early detection of any problems gives the best chance for successful treatment. She continued explaining the cleanup process, the timeline, the resources available. She was professional, thorough, and honest about both the challenges and the solutions. When she finished the technical presentation, Mayor Wilson opened the floor to questions. Linda Kowalski stood first. Dr. Doyle, how long have you known about this? I began suspecting approximately 2 weeks ago, based on the pattern of illness. I spent that time gathering evidence to confirm my suspicions before bringing it to the authorities. 2 weeks? People were getting sicker while you investigated? Linda's voice was sharp with accusation. Yes, I should have acted sooner. I was trying to be certain before making serious allegations. But you're right that I should have raised the alarm earlier. I apologize for that delay. Frank Morrison stood next, his face red with anger. You've been living in this town for 25 years, pretending to be someone you're not. You let us think you were just a simple blacksmith. Why? What were you hiding? Katherine met his eyes directly. I came to Ironvale after an accident at the nuclear facility where I worked. People were injured in that accident. Although I was not found legally responsible, I felt I had failed in my duty to prevent it. I couldn't continue in the field. I needed to start over, to do work that felt safer and simpler. I chose not to share my background because I wanted to leave that life behind. So you were running away, someone called out. Yes, I was running away from responsibility, from pain, from the person I had been. That was wrong. I should have been honest with this community that welcomed me. Sarah Martinez stood, her voice shaking. My son has been sick. My husband has been sick. I've been sick. We trusted you, Kate. You came to my house, you helped David with his project, and the whole time you knew something might be wrong. Why didn't you warn us sooner? The accusation hurt, but Katherine accepted it. I didn't know for certain until I had test results. But you're right that I suspected sooner than I acted. I was afraid that revealing my background would destroy the life I had built here. I put my own comfort ahead of your safety. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Frank said bitterly. My wife is sick because of that plant. I've been breathing in radiation for months. You could have prevented that. You're right. I failed you, all of you. But I'm here now, offering everything I know to help fix this situation. I know that doesn't erase my mistakes, but it's what I can do going forward. Dr. Patterson stood. I want to address something here. Yes, Dr. Doyle could have acted sooner. Yes, she should have been honest about her background. But she did act. She gathered evidence, she brought it to us, and she's providing expertise that we desperately need. How many of us would have recognized radiation exposure symptoms? How many would have known how to test for it? She made mistakes, but she's also saving lives right now. She's saving lives she helped endanger by staying silent, someone shouted. That's fair criticism, Katherine said quietly. I accept responsibility for the delay in my response. I also accept that some of you may never forgive that. But I still hope you'll allow me to help with the cleanup and recovery. This community gave me a home for 25 years. Let me repay that debt. Michael Chen stood up. I want to know more about this accident you mentioned. People were hurt? How badly? Katherine took a breath. This was the part she had hoped to avoid, but there was no hiding anymore. It was a containment breach at a research reactor facility. 12 people were exposed to moderate levels of radiation. They all survived and recovered, but some experienced long-term health effects. 3 people were hospitalized. The investigation found that a design flaw in a component I hadn't personally engineered caused the failure. But I had seen warning signs and didn't act on them quickly enough. I was cleared of legal responsibility, but I knew I had failed in my professional duty. So, you have a history of not acting on warning signs, Frank said coldly. The words struck like a physical blow. Katherine felt tears pricking her eyes but forced them back. Yes, that's exactly right, which is why I'm determined not to repeat that mistake here. I acted as soon as I had evidence. I'm working to fix this. I understand that doesn't erase what happened before, either there or here, but I'm trying to do better. Betty Morrison stood beside her husband, her voice tired but less angry. Kate, you've been my friend for 15 years. You made the iron trellis in my garden. You've helped our family countless times. I'm hurt that you lied to us, but I also know you're a good person. People make mistakes. What matters is what you do next. Thank you, Betty. That means more than you know. The meeting continued for another hour. More questions, more anger, more fear. Katherine answered every question honestly, accepted every criticism without defense, explained every technical detail patiently. Some people remained angry. Others began to soften. A few expressed gratitude that she had ultimately acted. The community was divided in their response, which Katherine understood and accepted. Near the end of the meeting, David Martinez raised his hand. Sarah tried to stop him, but the boy stood anyway. Dr. Doyle, when you helped me with my wind turbine, you talked about engineering being about responsibility and speaking up when you see problems. Were you talking about yourself? Katherine felt her careful control crack. Yes, David. I was talking about lessons I learned the hard way. I hope you'll be a better engineer than I was. Don't let fear stop you from doing what's right. I won't, he promised solemnly. Mayor Wilson closed the meeting with practical information about medical screenings, water distribution, and the ongoing response efforts. She announced that Dr. Doyle would be working with the state environmental team to coordinate the cleanup. We're facing a serious situation, but we have expertise and resources to address it. We'll get through this together, as we always do. As the crowd dispersed, Katherine stood by the display boards, available to answer individual questions. Some people avoided her entirely. Others approached with concerns about their specific situations. A few thanked her quietly for ultimately doing the right thing. Sarah Martinez approached last, David beside her. Kate, I'm still angry about the delay, but I'm grateful you finally acted. Thank you for trying to protect my son. I should have acted sooner, but I promise you, I'll do everything I can to make sure he and everyone else affected gets the care they need. Chief Martinez joined his family. Dr. Doyle, we're going to need a full statement about your background for our records. Standard procedure. Of course, I'll provide whatever documentation you need. As Katherine finally left the gymnasium, she felt exhausted, but also strangely relieved. The secret was out. The hiding was over. Yes, she had lost the trust of many people. Yes, her quiet life was destroyed. But she had also stopped a dangerous situation and was working to protect the community. Outside, the spring night was cool and clear. Katherine stood for a moment, looking up at the stars, the same stars she had looked at for 25 years from this small mountain town. She thought about Robert, her mentor, who had taught her that good work was its own reward. She thought about the accident that had driven her here, the guilt that had defined her for so long. She thought about the choice she had made to speak up despite the cost. Dr. Patterson approached as she stood there. That took courage, facing them all like that. It was the least I owed them. The medical screenings start tomorrow. I'd appreciate your help interpreting the results, understanding what we're looking for. I'll be there, whatever you need. He studied her for a moment. You made mistakes, Kate. Or should I call you Dr. Doyle now? Call me Katherine. Kate was a fiction. It's time to be honest about who I am. You made mistakes, Katherine, but you're also trying to fix them. That's more than a lot of people do. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. We need your expertise. After he left, Katherine walked slowly back to her truck. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more work, more consequences. But tonight, for the first time in 25 years, she felt something unexpected. Not peace, exactly. Not redemption, but purpose. The sense that she was finally using her knowledge and skills for good, openly and honestly. The blacksmith's quiet refuge was gone forever. But perhaps Dr. Katherine Doyle could build something better in its place. A life of service instead of hiding. A life of facing problems instead of running from them. It would not be easy. Many people in town would not forgive her. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, if it could be rebuilt at all. But she would do the work, whatever it took. Katherine drove home through the familiar streets of Ironvale, seeing her adopted town with new eyes. This was still her home. These were still her people. And she was finally, truly, ready to serve them honestly. The weeks that followed were intense and exhausting. Katherine worked 12-hour days with the state environmental team, helping coordinate the testing, cleanup, and medical response. Her technical expertise proved invaluable as they mapped the contamination, identified the specific materials that had been processed, and developed remediation strategies. The manufacturing plant investigation revealed that the company contracting with them had acquired salvaged industrial equipment from multiple sources without proper documentation or testing. Mixed among legitimate scrap metal were components from decommissioned medical devices and old industrial machinery containing radioactive materials. Without radiation detection equipment, workers had handled these materials daily, creating airborne contamination and releasing radioactive particles into the environment through normal processing operations. Frank Morrison and 3 other plant workers showed the highest exposure levels, though still within ranges that should not cause permanent damage with proper medical care. The 47 townspeople who had fallen ill all lived or worked in the contamination zone. Medical screenings revealed elevated exposure across the board, but no acute radiation sickness. Dr. Patterson, working with specialists from the state health department, established a monitoring program to track everyone affected long-term. The cleanup itself was a massive undertaking. Environmental crews worked to remove contaminated soil, treat affected water sources, and ensure the plant facility was properly decontaminated. The company that had provided the contaminated materials faced federal investigation and potential criminal charges for improper handling of radioactive substances. Through it all, Katherine was the steady presence providing expertise and guidance. She worked with environmental specialists, health officials, worried parents, and angry community members. She explained technical details patiently, translated scientific reports into understandable language, and ensured that every decision prioritized community safety. But the work came with a price. Her blacksmith workshop sat closed and empty. Orders went unfulfilled. The life she had built for 25 years was on permanent hold while she dealt with the consequences of finally being honest about who she really was. The town's response to her remained mixed. Some people, like Betty Morrison and Dr. Patterson, chose to focus on her current actions rather than her past deception. They appreciated her expertise and her evident dedication to fixing the problem. Others, like Frank Morrison, could not get past the feeling of betrayal. "You could have prevented this if you'd been honest from the start," Frank said during one tense community meeting. "If people knew we had a nuclear engineer in town, maybe we would have asked the right questions before accepting that contract." The criticism was fair, and Katherine accepted it without argument. She had made choices that prioritized her own peace over potential community benefit. That was a mistake she would have to live with. Sarah Martinez fell somewhere in the middle. She appreciated Katherine's work protecting David and the other children, but struggled with the dishonesty. "I keep thinking about all the times you were in my home, Kate. All the conversations we had. You were my friend, but you were also lying to me every day. I know. I'm sorry. I wish I could change that." "So do I." 6 weeks into the cleanup, Katherine sat in the mayor's office reviewing progress reports. The contamination was being successfully contained and removed. Medical monitoring was showing positive trends. The worst of the crisis was passing. Mayor Wilson studied the reports with evident relief. "You've done excellent work, Dr. Doyle. The state officials tell me your expertise has been crucial to the rapid response." "I'm glad I could help." "The question is, what happens next? Once the cleanup is complete, what are your plans?" Katherine had been thinking about that question constantly. "I honestly don't know. My workshop is closed. My reputation as a simple blacksmith is gone. I'm not sure there's a place for me in Ironvale anymore." "Is that what you want? To leave?" "No, this is my home. But I understand if the community would prefer I go. I've broken trust in a fundamental way." Rachel leaned back in her chair, considering. "You did break trust. No question about that. But you also saved this town from a much worse disaster. If you hadn't identified the problem and acted on it, the contamination could have continued for months or years. More people would have gotten sick. Children could have suffered permanent damage." "I should have acted sooner." "Yes, you should have. But you did act when many people would have stayed silent to protect themselves. That counts for something." The mayor paused. "The town council is meeting next week to discuss various issues related to the recovery. One item we're considering is creating a new position, environmental safety coordinator, someone with technical expertise to help us avoid situations like this in the future. Would you be interested in such a role?" Katherine was surprised. "You'd trust me with an official position after what happened?" "Trust has to be rebuilt, but it can be rebuilt. You've shown genuine remorse for your mistakes and dedication to making things right. Plus, frankly, we need someone with your knowledge. Ironvale is a small town. We don't have access to high-level scientific expertise normally. Having you here is an asset, if you're willing to be honest about your capabilities and use them for the community's benefit. I would be honored. But I should tell you, I haven't practiced engineering professionally for 25 years. My knowledge is dated in many ways. But your fundamental understanding is sound, and you can learn new developments. Will you at least consider the position?" "Yes, absolutely." Over the following weeks, as the cleanup continued, Katherine also began the slow process of rebuilding relationships in town. She accepted every invitation to speak at community meetings, answered every question about the situation, and made herself available to anyone with concerns. Some doors remained closed to her. Frank Morrison refused to speak with her directly. A few longtime customers sent word that they would not be returning to her workshop when it reopened, if it reopened. Katherine understood and did not push, but other relationships began to heal. Betty Morrison invited her to lunch, a tentative olive branch. "I'm still hurt that you lied, Kate. But I also remember all the good you've done over the years. People are complicated. Friendships can survive complications. Michael Chen stopped by the cleanup site one day with fresh bread. For the workers, he said, but he made sure to give Katherine a loaf directly. We're a small town. We can't afford to throw away good people over mistakes, especially when they're trying to make things right. David Martinez, with his mother's permission, asked Katherine to help him with another science project. "You're still the smartest person I know," he said simply. "And you told me to speak up about problems even when it's hard. You did that. I respect that." His simple faith moved Katherine deeply. Working with David on his new project, helping him understand principles of environmental science and radiation safety, felt like a small redemption. 3 months after the town meeting where Katherine had revealed her true identity, the cleanup reached its final stages. Contaminated materials had been safely removed and properly disposed. Affected water sources had been treated and tested clean. Soil remediation was nearly complete. Medical monitoring showed everyone recovering well, with no signs of serious long-term health effects. The town council voted unanimously to create the Environmental Safety Coordinator position and offered it to Katherine at a salary that was modest but fair. She accepted with gratitude. They also voted to provide compensation to affected residents through a settlement with the company that had provided the contaminated materials. Frank Morrison and the other plant workers received additional compensation for their occupational exposure. The manufacturing plant itself underwent complete restructuring under new management, with strict safety protocols that Katherine helped develop. Workers received training in radiation safety and proper detection equipment was installed. The facility reopened on a limited basis, providing employment while maintaining community protection. On a warm day in early August, Katherine stood in her workshop for the first time in months. Dust covered the tools and equipment. Her half-finished projects sat exactly where she had left them. The iron sculpture for the community center waited for completion. She had kept the workshop closed during the cleanup, uncertain about her future in town. But now, with a new position and a chance to rebuild, she was ready to reopen. Not as Kate, the simple blacksmith, but as Katherine, community member who happened to have skills in both metalwork and environmental safety. Sarah Martinez appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket. "Welcome back. I brought some cookies from Michael's bakery. Thought you might need energy for cleaning up this place." "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it." David wanted to come, but he's at a science camp this week. He's very excited about the environmental monitoring system you're setting up. Thinks he might study environmental engineering now instead of general engineering. Katherine smiled. He has the mind for it, and the heart. Sarah set down the basket and looked around the workshop. "I missed this place. You made beautiful things here. Will you continue the ironwork along with your new position?" "I plan to. The environmental coordinator role is important, but not full-time. I'll have time for both, assuming I still have customers who want to work with me." "You will. People are starting to move past the shock and anger. They're remembering that you've been a good neighbor and friend for 25 years. That counts for more than one mistake, even a big one." "I hope you're right. I also hope you'll be honest from now on. No more hiding, no more pretending to be someone you're not. Just be Katherine in all your complicated brilliance. I promise. No more hiding." After Sarah left, Katherine spent the rest of the day cleaning and organizing her workshop. She completed the iron sculpture for the community center, working with steady hands and a peaceful mind. The piece depicted mountain laurel branches intertwined with mining tools, representing Ironvale's history. She added one new element, a small blacksmith's hammer crossed with a scientist's radiation symbol, honest symbols of her own journey. The sculpture was installed at the community center in a small ceremony. Mayor Wilson made a speech about resilience and community. Dr. Patterson spoke about the importance of using our talents for the common good. And Katherine said simply, "I'm honored to serve this community honestly with all that I am and all that I know. Thank you for giving me a second chance." The applause was not universal, but it was real. As autumn arrived, Katherine settled into her new dual role. She coordinated environmental monitoring systems, consulted on industrial safety questions, and provided science education programs at the schools. She also returned to her blacksmithing, creating beautiful and functional pieces for customers old and new. Her work with David Martinez and other interested students led to an informal science mentorship program. She taught young people about environmental science, safety protocols, and responsible use of knowledge. She was honest about her past mistakes, using them as teaching examples about the importance of speaking up and acting on concerns. One evening, sitting on her porch after a long day of work, Katherine reflected on the journey from Dr. Katherine Doyle to Kate the blacksmith and back again. She had spent 25 years trying to escape her past, believing that hiding was the same as healing. She had been wrong. Healing came not from hiding, but from facing consequences, making amends, and using her knowledge honestly for good. The old guilt about the accident still lived in her heart. She suspected it always would, but it was accompanied now by something else: purpose, connection, and the knowledge that she was using her skills to protect rather than endanger. Betty Morrison walked by with her husband, both offering friendly waves. Frank still did not acknowledge her, but Betty's willingness to forgive was its own kind of gift. Dr. Patterson stopped by to discuss the latest medical monitoring results. Everyone's numbers continue to improve. You saved lives, Katherine. However it happened, whatever mistakes were made along the way, the result is that you saved lives. We saved lives. This was a team effort. True, but you were the one with the knowledge to recognize the problem and the courage to finally act on it. After he left, Katherine sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of her town. Children playing, people calling greetings to neighbors. The everyday rhythm of a small community going about its life. This was still her home. These were still her people. And she was finally, truly, a full member of the community. Not hiding, not pretending, just being herself in all her flawed, complicated, useful reality. The next morning, Katherine opened her workshop early. She had orders to fill, a monitoring report to prepare for the town council, and a science demonstration to set up for David's class. Her life was busier and more complex than during her quiet years as just a blacksmith. But it was also more honest, more connected, more meaningful. Katherine lit the forge, watching the flames catch and grow. She had spent so long seeing fire as a symbol of danger, of the destructive power that had driven her away from her first career. But fire was also transformation. It made iron malleable, allowed creation, purified metal into useful forms. Perhaps her own journey was a kind of forge fire. The heat of exposure and consequence had been painful, burning away the comfortable falsehood she had built. But what remained was stronger, more useful, more real. She picked up her hammer and began to work, shaping metal with skilled hands, while in the back of her mind she organized thoughts about the environmental report she would write later. Both skills, both identities, both parts of who she was. Not Kate the blacksmith, not Dr. Doyle the engineer. Just Katherine, using all her talents to serve the community she loved. The hammer rang against the anvil, sending sparks dancing through the workshop. And Katherine smiled, at peace with herself for the first time in 25 years. 1 year later. The first anniversary of the contamination crisis fell on a crisp autumn day. The Ironvale Community Center hosted a public health fair, offering free medical screenings and educational programs about environmental safety. Katherine coordinated the event, working with Dr. Patterson and the state health department. The medical news was excellent. All 47 affected residents had recovered completely. Long-term monitoring showed no evidence of lasting damage. The children, including David Martinez, were thriving and healthy. The environmental cleanup had been certified complete 6 months earlier. Regular monitoring confirmed that contamination levels were back to normal background radiation. The creek ran clean. The eastern section of town was safe. Life had returned to normal, though with new awareness and precautions in place. Katherine stood at a booth explaining radiation safety to curious townspeople, using simple demonstrations and clear language. She had developed educational materials for schools throughout the region, sharing the lessons learned from Ironvale's experience. The key, she explained to a group of teenagers, is that radiation is a natural part of our environment. We're exposed to small amounts every day from cosmic rays, minerals in the ground, even bananas. The danger comes from concentrated sources or prolonged exposure. Understanding the science helps us protect ourselves without unnecessary fear. David Martinez, now a high school sophomore with a definite plan to study environmental engineering, assisted with the demonstrations. He had become Katherine's informal apprentice, learning both metalworking and environmental science. Dr. Doyle, one teenager asked, is it true you used to be a nuclear engineer but pretended to be just a blacksmith? Katherine no longer flinched at such questions. Yes, that's true. I made a choice to hide my background because I was afraid of my past. It was the wrong choice. But I learned that we can't run from who we are. Our knowledge and skills are gifts meant to be used for the community's benefit, not hidden away. Do you regret becoming a blacksmith? Not at all. Learning that craft taught me valuable lessons about patience, precision, and honest work. Both skills, engineering and metalworking, make me more useful to this community. I'm grateful for both parts of my life. Throughout the day, townspeople stopped by to chat, ask questions, or simply say hello. The anger and betrayal of a year ago had mostly faded, replaced by acceptance and appreciation. Katherine had proven herself through consistent service, honest expertise, and genuine commitment to the community. Frank Morrison appeared late in the afternoon. He had avoided Katherine for most of the year, his hurt and anger slow to heal. But now he approached her booth with an uncertain expression. Dr. Doyle, can we talk? Of course, Frank. They stepped away from the crowd. Frank was quiet for a moment, then said, Betty tells me I need to let go of the anger, that holding on to it isn't hurting you, just hurting me. Betty is a wise woman. I was so mad at you. Felt like you could have prevented everything if you'd just been honest from the start. You were right to be angry. I made choices that put people at risk. I can't change that. No, but you fixed it. You got us through the crisis. And this past year, you've worked hard to make things right. He paused. I'm not saying we're friends again, not yet, but I'm willing to stop being angry. Betty says that's a start. Katherine felt emotion tighten her throat. That's more than I expected. Thank you, Frank. He nodded and walked away, but the weight of his grudge had lifted from both of them. As the health fair wound down, Mayor Wilson found Katherine. Excellent event, great turnout, lots of positive community engagement. You've done remarkable work this year. Thank you, Mayor. It's been a privilege to serve. The council meeting is next week. We're voting on making your position permanent and expanding its scope. I expect it will pass unanimously. Ironvale needs what you offer, Katherine. both your expertise and your example. My example? Of someone who made mistakes but took responsibility and worked to fix them. Of someone who uses their talents for the community instead of personal gain. Of someone who had the courage to stop hiding and be honest about who they are. Rachel smiled. Those are good lessons for all of us. That evening, Katherine returned to her workshop. The space was alive again with projects and purpose. An order for decorative gates for the new park. A custom piece for the high school science lab. Parts for environmental monitoring stations. Her work blended art and science, metal and mathematics, creativity and precision. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The bright young engineer who believed science could solve everything. The traumatized woman who ran from responsibility. The hidden blacksmith seeking peace through simplicity. And finally, Katherine, using all her skills openly and honestly. The accident at the research facility would always be part of her story. She had learned to carry that burden without letting it crush her. The 12 people injured in that long-ago disaster had all recovered, she had confirmed through recent research. Knowing they were well brought its own kind of peace. And Ironvale had become her redemption. Not because the crisis erased her past mistakes, but because it gave her the chance to use her knowledge wisely, to act quickly when it mattered, to prioritize community over comfort. Katherine locked up her workshop and walked home through the familiar streets. Autumn leaves crunched under her feet. Porch lights glowed warm in the gathering dusk. People called out greetings as she passed. This was home. Not a hiding place, but a real home. A place where she belonged not because she pretended to be someone else, but because she was fully herself, and that self had value. She thought about young people like David, learning that science was a responsibility as well as a tool. She thought about the environmental monitoring systems protecting the town. She thought about the iron sculpture at the community center, honest symbols of all she was. At her house, Katherine prepared a simple dinner and sat on her porch as darkness fell. The mountain air was cool and clean. Stars emerged one by one overhead. Everything was peaceful. But this was not the peace of hiding or running away. This was the peace of honest work, genuine connection, and purpose served. The peace that came from using your gifts, accepting your flaws, and contributing to something larger than yourself. Katherine smiled, content in a way she had never been during her 25 years of hiding. She had finally learned the lesson that took a lifetime to understand. True peace comes not from escaping who you are, but from being fully yourself in service to others. Tomorrow she would return to her dual work, crafting iron and protecting the environment, teaching young people, and serving the community. She would continue building trust, proving through action that mistakes do not define us if we learn from them and work to do better. The stars shone bright above Ironvale, watching over a small town that had faced crisis and emerged stronger. And Katherine Doyle, once hidden but now revealed, sat peacefully beneath them, grateful for second chances and honest work. The story of the blacksmith's secret had become the story of the community's strength, of knowledge used wisely, of courage found in unexpected places. And it continued still, written day by day in the life of a woman who had learned that running from the past was never as powerful as facing it with honesty and using it to build a better future. Katherine rose and went inside, ready to rest and prepare for whatever tomorrow would bring. Her forge would burn bright again in the morning. Her knowledge would serve those who needed it. And her heart, once broken by guilt and fear, would continue healing through the simple act of being useful, honest, and present. This was enough. This was everything. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.